We're going to start off, Mira's going to start off with a presentation, followed by Georgia and then Gagi. Each person is going to speak for 10 minutes, and then we're going to have some discussions for the final half hour. So I'd just like to welcome Mira and ask you to start.
Thank you. And alert me about 2 minutes before I have to finish if I need to. Well, Brexit. I think we all have been quite shocked by Brexit. Even those who fought for Brexit, Nigel Farage already started the speech of conceding defeat at midnight, and Boris Johnson kind of almost got a heart attack from the fact that it happened because he was supposed to be the one that almost succeeded but did not succeed. But in hindsight, of course, the energy was in the Brexit camp. The transformation, the psychological trick that usually if you are asking people to change, then the change is unknown and people feel unsafe. But the Brexit camp managed to transform it so that the unknown was associated with continuing in the EU. And when we are outside, we are taking control, we know what is happening, and so on. Of course, between this and reality is a different matter, but the issue is why so many different segments of the British society have voted for Brexit. And I'm interested especially in two. One, the traditional Labour voters of white working class in Northern England, and the other one, the settled racialized minorities that came from what used to be known NCWP, New Commonwealth countries, and Pakistan. And I'll come back to it later, but I want to link this to what I call in my writings the double crisis of governability and governmentality. And I'll explain what I mean, and I want to link this crisis to the bottom-up response of the rise of extreme right populism on the one hand, and the top-down response of the government of what we call everyday bordering. And I would argue that this double movement from the bottom and from the top prepared the ground for Brexit and prepared the ground for Donald Trump. And I just had a discussion with Ruud today about what's happened in Japan in the new parliament, and of course in so many other places as well. The double crisis of governability and governmentality is due to the fact that under neoliberal globalization, the power of government, especially the executive, to actually represent the interest of their citizens have been diminishing very significantly. Partly it was because with the privatization of the state, a lot of the decision-making that parliament and committees and legislation used to make is outside their hands. It's what Michael Murphy called the contract capitalism, which depoliticized so many parts of public life and the public economy. And also as a result of it, there is so much entanglement of the private and the public, as we could see in the banking crisis, that the government and supposedly representing citizens had to bail out the banks in order for the whole system not to collapse. But kind of the whole context to it is that two things. First of all, the combined richness, economic sources of the top multinationals in the world is more than 10 times larger than the combined wealth of all the nation states in the world. So the power relations here is incredible and incredibly uneven. Moreover, through these kind of tricks of LTD that the companies have supposedly legal personal identity, and those who actually get the profits and the management are not responsible, and these companies can move, can escape liability, responsibility to all the damage that they do, whether to people, to the environment, and whatever. And now, through the TIPP didn't pass, but apparently there are going even worse alternatives, and now after Brexit, in Britain, even if in the EU there is still going to be resistance, the companies will not just have equal status to people legally, but they are going to have equal legal status to governments. So they will be able to sue governments for preventing them to making the profit, or too much kind of so-called red tape about health and regulation and so on. So this is a governmentability crisis. The neoliberal governmentality, as Foucault and others have been talking about, has been to internalize that the responsibility for the well-being of individuals is up to them. If they are not healthy, if they are not happy, if they are not wealthy, if they don't have work, it's not because society does not even exist. It is their own responsibility. At a certain point, people started to realize that all this is a very big nonsense. But the ability, look at Syriza in Greece. Even the best political program and project and commitment of political, they cannot do. What's happening in Greece now is this terrible privatization of the state and enslavement of the citizens to all these debts and so on. So people started to feel completely alienated from government. They are not voting, but in order to keep the illusion of democracy, governments need them to vote. And people started to think that what is needed is really to take back control. And of course, both for people and for government, the vulnerable are people. They are not the companies, they are not the economies, they are people. So the scapegoating of those who supposedly do not belong, if we look at Marine Le Pen and other kind of so-called new extreme right, they claim they are not racist. But they want to rescue the welfare state and to give all the access to the resources of the state to those who belong. They have this nostalgic picture of the citizen state and people, that those who do not belong to the hegemonic national ethnic racial group, then they are the ones who are undermining, parasites, and because they are the failure. Governments have also, instead of trying to regulate and to control the companies, there are some symbolic attempts, but not really make a lot of difference. They, and Britain, have been an extreme kind of maybe so-called pioneer. Georgie mentioned the Immigration Act of 2014 and 2016. When we had this meeting in the House of Commons about this everyday bordering, one of the baronesses that spoke said that this is the nastiest law that she has ever encountered in all her 40 years of being a member in the House of Lords. Because what this everyday bordering does is that border guarding becomes part of citizenship duty. We all, as unpaid, untrained border guards, are responsible to identify if our students, our tenants, our employees, our colleagues, our patients are not entitled to get the job, the housing, the public services, the health services. So, thank you. So what is happening is that people, the convivial, pluralist, multicultural society, of course there were a lot of issues of racism and unequal power relationship. I'm not trying to be nostalgic and to say that it was perfect. We have all fought and wrote around this issue. But what is happening is that we are all become very sensitized to who belongs and who do not belong. I've been working in British university since the early 70s. But now when I was asked to examine a PhD in the University of London, I had to prove that I work legally in Britain. So I had to produce, and they kept on reminding me without my passport. And it's funny, but it's also terribly serious. And after Brexit, we saw the shooting up of racialized attack. And some of the settled minorities, racialized minorities, voted Brexit because they had this image of the mother empire, that there are boundaries in which all these people coming, especially from East Europe and so on, are undermining them. It is autochtonic politics, which I don't have now time to talk about. It may be kind of in discussion. But, a friend of mine was talking on the phone, on the tube, in another language than English, and he was attacked. We don't want to hear other languages. I don't know if you watched X Factor. I love X Factor. There is a Finnish singer. They didn't stop talking about Finland, or maybe it's Norway and it's Scandinavia. It's abroad. And she was at the bottom too. She's a fantastic singer. But British society is now very xenophobic. So all this Brexit is an outcome of this undermining of convivial pluralist societies, the sensitizing of who belongs, who doesn't belong. It's racialized, but in a much more complex way than black and white and post-colonial and not post-colonial. It's about citizenship as a property of claiming ownership and the exclusion of others. And it's just becoming worse rather than better. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mira and Georgia. And I think your talk's got the same title.
Yeah, same title, yes, like a
Yeah.
general one, yes.
Yeah.
But it's a different take. So.
So what I'm trying to do in this presentation is very briefly to highlight a few points, really. And I'm outlining that now, so that you can, so the first point I want to make is that while we're now focusing on Brexit and post-Brexit, the point I want to make is that if we look at it in terms of a historic perspective and some sort of long-term series of conjunctures, what we are witnessing now at Brexit is not Brexit per se, but is the outcome of other continuities and constellations. So that's the first point I'm going to make here around belonging and not belonging. So it's a reconfiguration of who belongs and who doesn't belong, really. But these issues have been there for a long time. The second point that I want to make is that while we talk of Brexit in terms of binaries, it's the levers were around economics, the remainers around economic advantages, the levers around immigration, and so on and so on. What I want to point out is that if you look at it as a constellation of discourses, we can see that there's something underneath there which is more complex than that. And the third point that I will make is that affect, as Mira was saying, the Brexit campaign had a stronger emotional passion. And I actually want to point out that the affect that is involved around Brexit and post-Brexit also is something that we're not maybe talking a lot about, but that's important. And I will conclude with a brief point around post-Brexit and what can we do on a hopefully positive note. So I'm going to be quick here, so I'm just highlighting this point. So the first point that I'm trying to make is, apologies for that. So when we think of Brexit, and the flag as an example, it's a collage. It's a collage of different parts that are being cut and reconstituted. And what we see at the moment are around discourses on who belongs and what, but fundamentally there are also discourses around who decides who belongs and who doesn't belong. So when there is this kind of, we say, historic conjuncture, so there was a surprise that, of who voted, to leave, and some people, in a way it was, the north of England, and Wales, and then while Ireland and the south and Scotland voted to remain. But actually, if we look at it in more kind of historic terms, the north of England, after the industrial, the closure of the mines and the industrial kind of reduction in Wales as well, felt that it did not belong to the project of the UK. So for them, I think that we need to keep in mind that this kind of geographies of the industrial decay, the geographies of this not belonging to the project of the economic development and cosmopolitanism were also part of that. So the surprise maybe was not so much of a surprise. Where, again, if you don't belong to this imagined collective of the UK, of London, of wealth and prosperity, then where does the EU fit with it? It's not something that you want to belong to because you feel it's even further away. But what is interesting is that there was, in a way, a national and an international kind of agenda taking place. And what is interesting is that throughout the debate, but also now, we are talking about reclaiming the borders, reclaiming an identity. What we're not very much talking about is that a lot of people are also losing an identity. They're losing the EU passport. So they're losing a form of citizenship. So a lot of the discussions around what we want to take borders and control back, and we want to belong and retreat. And there isn't a discussion of what we are, in a way, also losing in terms of the other form of belonging. So this is the fact. And then in relation to migration, which has been a very high issue on the agenda, making the other unwanted, non-belonging has been this strategy. But also what I want to point out is that it is also being ongoing. So what we see now is just a different formation of what has been going on. So what we're seeing now are all these discussions around, again, children having been recorded around countries of origin. Mira was talking, about giving passports to show that you work and so on and so on. But having worked in the area of refugees and asylum and migration for a number of years, these are not new things. We've been seeing this in different forms for a long time. So, having lists of, landlords providing lists of their tenants, that happened before Brexit. University attendance, international students needing to record their attendance, that has been there before. The passport has been there before. There have been all these forms of kind of making the gradation of who belongs and who doesn't belong according to citizenship categories has been there. So now we're just seeing a different kind of formation of that, but I want to point out that there are continuities. I think that's the main point I want to make here. The second point I want to make is around this discursive formation of what it was Brexit about and what is post-Brexit about. So we heard a lot around this binary kind of discussion, the leavers and the remainers, two different discourses, the economy and immigration. Though there was this kind of binary construction. But actually, there is a much broader kind of constellation that is going on around these discourses. And what is interesting is that lots of the discussions were around, let's say, immigration taking, our jobs, where you're taking the NHS being overwhelmed and so on and so on. They were around the using of resources. But actually, and then the other debate was around the economy and promoting the economy and so on and so on. But if one looks at it in a different way and brings the two together, what we can see is that a lot of discourses around the NHS, around housing, they're actually somewhat paradoxical, because in the current environment, there are no housing, there's no social housing. So you can't have, the health service is being slowly privatized. So at one level, there is this thing of, we need to remain in the EU because we can have access to all these clients, and then people are coming in, stealing our resources, but these resources are being privatized. So a lot of these discussions were somewhat constructed as being separate, but actually connected. And I want to make this point, that there are these constellations. There was a lot also around these ideas of, the crisis, the migration crisis, the identity crisis of the UK, and so on and so on. And again, there are constellations there where the economy, migration, security have been on the agenda for a while, and they're just, in a way, being brought together. And almost want to say that Brexit was a way of policing these different crises. And just say, we need to deal with terrorism, we need to deal with migration as a threat, we need to not deal with the economic crisis. But if we look at these configurations, we can also see that there are these connections around focusing on migration, health, education, and so on and so on. So I was trying to bring the following slides together, but I have not managed, so I'm just going to show them one by one. So if we look at it as a discourse information, Brexit, health, and so on and so on. So what we see is that we have firms must list foreign workers, it's now being retracted, but it's been there. We have something around school census, parents, refusing to reveal their child nationality. We've had the LSE being very worried about non-UK academics having discussions around Brexit. We've had, the Daily Mail talking about patients at risk from EU doctors. Now, if we look at these discourses, they're all around specific areas. And they're all in a way the areas. They are education, health, primary, and so on and so on. They are in a way the areas which were part of the old social welfare system. So an attack on that around these areas is a way of, again, talking to Brexit around something else. And they're all connected. That's the point I want to make. The third point I want to make is the importance of affect when we think of who belongs and who doesn't belong. So while we, Anderson talks about these emerging communities, the sense of belonging, the sense of, taking control back, the sense of, thinking about who we are and identities, and who is in and who is out. But all of a lot of the discourse around Brexit was a discourse that was framed through the language of emotion. And it was a language of, again, fear, threat, anger, and so on and so on. And post-Brexit is also, there's a lot of anger. We've seen racist attacks. They are around the eruption of anger and frustration. The fear of many people who, like me, felt perfectly comfortable, and then suddenly going outside London didn't feel comfortable a couple of days after. So there is all this new emergence of new emotions of uncertainty and fear that were part of the discourse, but they're also in a way around the emotions and the belonging and the spaces, the border national spaces. So there is at one level this discourse that through fear and retreat repositions this idea of national belonging along particular lines that in a way puts somebody out, migrants as a threat to social cohesion and so on and so on. There's also what we have in the post-Brexit, which is the reconfiguration of some sort of new belonging, which is around the trauma and the wound of what happened with the 48 and 52%. This new division of creating a new emerging community of the ones who feel that they are part of a project and the ones who feel they're part of a different project. And how that is playing out in the post-Brexit, we've already seen with increase of attacks and so on and so on. What I also find interesting in terms of affect is the whole language of Brexit was around taking back control. And even, even now there are all these discourses around migration and control. And again, from the point of view of affect, the term control is quite, is a defense mechanism. When you feel that you're undermined from all angles, what you try to do is you retreat and take control. And I find that that is also interesting in terms of the current language around migration and around, post-Brexit discourses of controlling really, which is controlling resources, but it's also controlling emotions. And therefore recreating this, this way of reimagining one issue. And yet I want to point that there is this tension, however, because as in post-Brexit, we, as part of the UK, are reimagining a new nation where the EU citizens are out. There are also this uncomfortable truth that we're not really talking about, which is around, the difference between cohesion as the English, the West, the Scottish, the Irish, who voted in different ways. But also the whole thing, and Mira mentioned the empire, all this nostalgia almost for a place in the world that was there before, and that it's almost as if by exiting the EU we can reclaim that global empire aspiration, and which again is very interesting psychologically because it's a bit of a cognitive dissonance there of retreating, then claiming that you are a global power. But also what is interesting is that some of the deals are being discussed around former Commonwealth countries and former colonies, as if the subjects of those colonies would welcome kind of a reconstitution of the old empire. So there's something there which is also a bit, inconsistent. And the aspirations for safety and control that were part of Brexit are actually leading to a post-Brexit sense of high insecurity. So the last point I want to make is, within this context, what do we do? So we see here, I'll just show you an example. For me, what is interesting is that, about this, which translates to my last point, it is that we've seen an increase in attacks, we've seen an increase in racist attacks, but actually what we've seen an increase in homophobic attacks, in attacks in general. That again points to a constellation, not separations. It's not just the migrants, that the migrants are becoming a symbol of something else. Whether it's the economy, whether it's the gender relations, and so on and so on. And then in the bottom part, you have the campaigners are urging for for laws to change and promote this change after the referendum. So the last point I want to make is, what about the future? We heard that, we saw that as well. What about the future? So in terms of future, I stay with. So we need almost to be ready psychologically, in terms of affect, to the fact that the only thing we know at the moment is that there will be uncertainty. So living with uncertainty is, in a way, an affective state that we kind of need to think around and be, in a way, able to live with, and opacity, not knowing what is really going on. But then, on the other hand, within this state of uncertainty, can this state of post-Brexit, call it crisis, call it reconfiguration, which has continuities with the past, can we look at the past and look at the future to create new form of, perhaps, new formations or new possibilities? And I just want to conclude by highlighting two. And one is the solidarity across difference. So what, in the same way in which, during the miners' strikes in the 80s, there were the miners, but there were the activists, there were the women's groups, they all got around this area, and they were all joining forces to promote, to support the miners. I think that now what we can see is around maybe Brexit, migration, and so on and so on, we can see the constellation of solidarities, where you have, Calais, we have migrants groups, we have Black Lives Matter, and they can all in a way reconstitute themselves. And that can be not just within the UK, but also transnationally. So that raises the idea that Europe maybe, as an imagined community, is still there. So post-Brexit is not really post-Brexit at one level. You can still think of a European Rex Europe, I don't know how to call it, which again has got these transnational identities and movements around borders, ecologies and identities. And that's
Gargi is going to present on Brexit and the fictions of class. I hope that's when it comes up.
Go back to old-fashioned things like lemon sticks. Because then you just have it in your hand.
It's amazing.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Georgia. Sorry about that. Maybe just put it down. Sorry, it's a long pause. I should probably say that, of course, predictably, quite a lot of what I'm going to say overlaps quite a great deal with the things that Neera and Georgia have already said, apart, unfortunately, from the initial factual basis of what happened. Apart from that, all of our analysis is the same. So I'm just going to show the facts truly are post-factual. It doesn't matter that we disagree on this foundational element. The whole argument after that is almost identical. So thank you so much, Georgia. Right, you just go to...
Oh no, no. Oh no.
Yes.
Right, shall I try it? Thank you so much. Right. And someone told me off for this using fictions as if it was... I don't use fictions as a like on telling stories, but I think that certain kind of fantasies might have been better. That it's been pretty clear from all of the coverage since the day of the referendum that there are some fairly extensive and developed fantasies of what class identity and class agency are that are peopling the narrative of what is this thing called Brexit. So I just have 2 or 3 points to make about how we might think about that. Firstly, as has already been alluded to, almost before the voting booths were shut, we had a quite worked out narrative that this is the biting back of a disenfranchised white working class. It's geographically spread. It's the north kicking back against the south. It's the deindustrialised regions that never recovered from Thatcherism coming back against southeast that has bubbled around the financial and creative industries and doesn't move outside its sphere. It's about people who have to compete for jobs with migrants against people who think migrants are their nannies and cleaners and corner shop people. You know, we've all read that story, seen it on telly. And after this repetition of a story which was pretty much echoed, I think, across the mainstream political spectrum, that both the people who said, oh no, oh woe is me, and those who said, aha, we've won, kind of both said that that's what was happening. All that really seemed to happen, as far as I could see, it was a bit of hand-wringing, oh no, now we must listen to the poor dispossessed. But not much has changed apart from this increasingly extreme articulation of anti-migrant sentiments. And we've seen, the Tory Party conference was a kind of stock piece of that, wasn't it? We'll say some really, really, really horrible extreme things, and within 3 days we'll say, oh, not really, but we've already been in the papers and everyone feels better. And I'm trying to take too long, but in the Go Home Vans project, which was a project led by Warwick but had 8 sides, when we tried to look at what happened when they did that horrible Go Home Vans thing, the one poor person was meant to speak to the government and the Home Office, who could hardly get anyone to speak to him, had the few people who would speak to him off the record saying, look, we don't think we can do very much. The public don't think we can do very much. Even when we tell them what we're doing, they don't believe what we're doing. All we're going for is that kind of spectacle of effective noise, because that's the range of our endeavour. So this is a continuation and kind of amplification of that. It's already taken too long, trying to move on a bit quicker. So as people have already said, it seems much more likely that Brexit, in however many ways we frame it, particularly as a migrant crisis, is a proxy for many other tensions. Now, Danny Dorling, who's now at Oxford, isn't he?
and is on telly much, much too much, and has said some horrible things, but also some very great things about this, wrote, I think just a couple of weeks after Brexit in British Medical Journal, because this one figure came out in the July, just in the month afterwards, that the deaths in Britain in that year up to July 2015 really had a big leap. 500,000 more people died. I mean, a country this size is quite a big leap. Disproportionately in the older age ranges, Danny Dorling is quite credibly saying, well, one thing we're saying is that means that people who need care, that we're just letting them die. You know, something like 12% rise in the over 90s, 9-10 in the 80s to 90s. That's quite a big leap and in a country this size, 500,000 is quite a big leap. You say, well, that's more significant. But he wanted to use that to make an argument to say, don't believe the class fairy tale. He's saying, and I think he is still using those Ashworth figures, because I think they might be the only ones any good, Ashworth, but most of those who voted Leave live in the south of England. That might not mean the biggest percentage of the people who live in the south of England, but in terms of the hard numbers of people who voted Let's Get Out, more of them live in this space which is the multicultural, convivial, financial industries, we are not disenfranchised, but what's one bit he wants to say? And he very importantly wants to challenge the class narrative. He says, and I'm just quoting off him because I didn't go back and look at what the exit polls said, that Leave voters, whatever we say about disenfranchised working class, kicking back, 59% are what he's calling middle class. Oh, I lost my bit. I did have a little table for those of you who are undergraduates, or just those of you who don't know about how Britain classifies class, but it goes something like professional management, or it might be management professional, then skilled working class, then unskilled working class, semi-skilled, unskilled. So the top three, A, B and C1, they're the kind of not hands dirty jobs. They're kind of white-collar jobs. So 59% of people who voted Leave have got those more middle-classy jobs. They're not the disenfranchised necessarily. Only 41% of Leave voters are in those groups we call the working class, and only 24% of the people who voted Leave are in those two lowest classes, the ones who people in the world who still do semi-skilled and unskilled labour, who are meant to be those UKIPers, those ones who hate us. So, I thought that's all pretty interesting, and he's been saying it a bit more, because on Newsnight last month, saying it again. I thought, oh, that's interesting, that despite that account, still it hasn't really clouded the ongoing narrative, oh yes, this is the class divide, it's about time, a bit back, it's related to Trump, it's all the same story. Dorling's argument, which I have some sympathy with, but I think it needs quite a bit more pushing on it, is its austerity. That links very much with both what was said by Georgia and Nera. There's a long train of dispossession for a number of people which squeezes your access to resources and your sense of entitlement and your sense of comfort and safety. That's alongside very real material dispossession, because things are much, much less. Dorling has some very good figures about what since Thatcher, the erosion of healthcare spending and education spending has been in this country. Really huge. He has this figure about we'd have to spend about £1,000 billion or something to get close to equivalent health spending to Germany. Now that's kind of philosophy now. When did that happen? It happened in my lifetime. But he also wants to say, you know, I buy that. I buy that something has happened to the texture of everyday life in this country, and not just this country, which makes us all feel understandably unsafe, and some people so insecure that their lives barely don't make ends meet. We know, you know, even if you live in London, you know those people. If you catch the bus very, very early in the morning, very late at night, you see the people who are going to those jobs. But he also wants to say, look, it's the middle class what done it. Don't think it's the white working class, it's those people in the southeast who had no business being disaffected and disenfranchised. They're the biggest group of voters for Brexit. So that's cool. They're not quite the same story, in my view. I'm talking too much, so I'm going to stop in a moment, then you can all say what you think. But they seem to me, they're two different whodunits. Austerity, what done it, the middle class, what done it. Different organs. So as we've pretty much agreed, a bit too unanimously, because it makes us look like a faction or something, honestly, we are. clear also that immigration is itself a kind of symptom of the symptom, symbol of other and larger debates. And there's a lot of variation and slippage between those things. It kind of depends what we interpret EU membership to mean. So there's lots of stuff about borders, but there's also things which I think are very legitimate about bureaucracy and accountability, the preserve of the political class and the failure of political institutions. Who could have had their eyes open for any moments in the last decade or two and not think that these are not legitimate grievances? Whether you're rich or poor, isn't that kind of true? If we take out that one, aren't we all leavers? In an extent of how can you make democracy real for people? So the Brexit vote is a kind of forced disruption in that different way of thinking of the symptom. It is a breakage, isn't it? And lots of people have also been saying that. It's almost like, I want to kick. Who is there to kick? You gave me this thing to kick, let me kick it. And the key thing which seems to have come out of it is some kind of resurrection of popular politics, but only in the most mean-minded and narrow sense. So there's a kind of attempt to be popular, but only in this quite demeaning way of this is what the people want. You know, Amber Rudd is just, you racists, I'll give you what you want, isn't it? It's a kind of, it's a demeaned idea of the British people. And even from the left, the Blairites who are, when they're not kicking Corbyn, what they're saying is you need to understand that the British people have got legitimate concerns about migration. Owen No-Face. Well, you know, that was his whole ticket, wasn't it? That don't you understand that the British people are legitimately racist? Now this is the same theatre of this, isn't it? The attempt, the response of our existing political class seems to be no different from the thing that made the rupture happen. You're trying to, how can we reach out? What do the plebs want? Oh, I think they want more racism. Quick, another mo. The people are never there yet. So we haven't yet, even though there's been a rupture, there hasn't been a realignment of political culture in this country yet. And that's kind of, I feel, where we are. And it's dangerous, isn't it? It's a dangerous moment, because at that moment it can fall either way or always, and you can feel that danger. Right, I think that's all I have to say. Right. Three last things. This way I'll definitely disagree with the faction or have a pretense of a debate. I think it's probably a mistake to decry Brexit as an expression of racism. I think racism was very much used as a vehicle within it, but as people have already said, there's plenty of racism in this country already, plenty of people getting their windows and doors kicked in before that. Not many of them are white Europeans. So it's something, a vehicle to give voice to racism is, I think, not the same as something which is in itself an expression of racism. I know you all agree with me, but I just feel like we need to say this to each other. It is probably impossible to calm the rupture caused by this situation by trying to be increasingly and visibly racist to migrants and those associated with migrants. I'm kind of saying that so that we might have a conversation with the Labour Party and say, do you know what? This is a fool's game. You somehow, at some point, need to understand that that is not what happened. And even if it was, this is not the thing that changes that configuration. But equally, and I know conviviality doesn't mean an idyll, but conviviality, I think, for lots of people, just didn't seem, when was that? So it's not as if that began and it happened, but something strange happened. I've been in lots of terrible meetings, I'm sure lots of you have as well, where people of colour quite rightly say, how come this was never in the news when it was happening to us? Suddenly a few Spanish people, I don't know, of course, terrible, another Polish bloke got murdered the other week. But there's something about, Britain had a fiction of itself as not this violent place, and something about this, now we see ourselves, we really are this violent place. It's not interesting, isn't it? What is that? Because that's an opportunity, isn't it? That sudden mirroring of ourselves. Okay, now you see it, and now you can say other things, and people can say, do you know what? That's been happening to our kids and my granny for forever. So that was the end of that.
So, Nira and Georgia, would you like to just come and sit up front? So we've only got 50 minutes.
Yes, I'm
to
very
have
sorry.
a discussion. But, the two speakers all have a lot to say.
Can you speak louder?
I was just wondering if anyone in this country at the moment is looking at the idea of Brexit as what Naomi Klein was saying about shock therapy, and that it actually has put a huge disablement of people's thoughts, feelings. The state has placed the people back into having to look after their own division of people, displacement of people, unbelonging, belonging, while they can push through any policy changes, any control, any economic. And how can we look at solutions to get everyone back together as a collective people, to move away from all our time consumed questioning what's happened before, what's happening after, and does that make sense?
Oh, shall we take?
Let's take
uh,
it.
yes, yes, no.
I mean, there's so many things to say. I totally have been saying, well, I've been thinking for a long time that it wasn't the working class that done it, and because I've been kind of sick of hearing that. And it's bad to base things on your own anecdotal experience, but just speaking to some members of my own family who live in the North of England, who are working class people who absolutely voted to remain because they understood that things about race relations and what Brexit, what lay behind Brexit. I think it's Billy Bragg who said, not everyone who votes leave is a racist, but all the racists who are voting to leave. But I just think the Tory party, and I know it's a little bit of kite flying, that they're throwing all these crazy ideas in the air to see which one might just get the approval of the general public. And they're making all the running. So the only thing I wanted to say really, apart from all the other, those I could go on for another hour, was I think we've all got a bit of a responsibility. Now I say this as a trade union rep who works here. We've always got a responsibility, all of us, to not be drowned out by the Daily Mail. By the way, immigration, when we hear this stuff, we can't talk about immigration because we're racist. I just remember when I was a student in 2002, I looked at the front pages of the Daily Mail, Daily Express over a 3-week period, and every single day there was the word immigration swarm, immigration swamp, immigration negative. So we've been talking about it at least for 15 years, I'm sure much, much longer. So I think we've all got a responsibility, whatever we see the future of Britain, to not let the public discourse get drowned out. As students, as staff members, as trade unionists, as whatever, we need to, at the very least, within our own circle of people, we all have people in our circle who might buy some of these ideas that, immigration is all negative, and I think we've got a voice and we need to start using it a little bit more. And I know probably loads of us do that already, but I think we've all got to raise our game a little bit. Even if it's in our own little area with our own friends and our own colleagues and the people that we see every day.
It sort of fits in with what you all were saying, but it's just an additional thing. I think it's interesting to see how the sort of discourse of the Tory party was, first of all, it's Brexit, it's Europeans, it's EU focused entirely, and they were scandalised at that Farage promotional kind of ad with the sort of migrants from the Middle East and so on. And yet, at the Tory party conference last weekend, suddenly there was this slippage to all foreigners. And suddenly a foreigner, and not just somebody from the EU, had to be identified. So everybody suddenly has to be identified. And so whether you come from Switzerland or whether you come from, Ukraine or Latin America and so on, it's not just the EU people that they want to keep out, which actually exposes the racist kind of subtext so much more. So, they haven't been able to sort of contain the debate around Brexit at all. And it has just spilled out. But I mean, I agree, of course, it's all been there for a long time, and they tried to kind of hide it for a little while, and then just splashed out again.
I'd like to say during the referendum I attended some Brexit events and Brexit rallies to talk to people who wanted to vote leave, and I was so surprised at the actual amount of young people my age who wanted to vote leave. And the fact that's not being presented in the media, and they presented it as, the older people are bringing the youngest generation, but that's not really the truth. So I was really relieved that you also brought up the point about no Brexit as being racist, because I honestly think the media is amplifying that kind of I would say that there have always been racist before, and people just politicising Brexit, through these racist acts that are now being brought to the media. So I was quite happy you brought up your lecture at the end.
There is more, has gone up, isn't it? The homophobia thing is really important.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a...
Yeah, but it's always existed. Racism will never go. Post-Brexit, Brexit or no Brexit, there will always be racism in the country.
I think we all. Yeah.
Yeah, let's try and move on to
It was just further what Mika said about the homophobia thing, and it's a question directly to Georgia because it's something that I've not really been able to make sense of because we've been told over the last 15 years there's been the kind of hegemony of homo-nationalism and the pitting of sexual minorities' rights and women's rights against, backward migrant kind of communities and stuff like that. And so in fact that doesn't really make I'd be interested in what you made of that because certain types of gay people have moved much more into the mainstream of popular culture and contemporary society. And it's difficult for me to work out what's untangling there, but that has obviously really happened, and I just wondered if you had thought about it, because I can't make sense of it.
So there's a few points there which I think everybody's going to try and pick up on. I'll start with Mira and then work this direction.
Okay. I'll start with a foreigner. When I came to Britain in the 70s, after living a few years in the United States, after leaving Israel, I understood, I always used to say to friends, for the first time, the meaning of two things. One was class, because in the other countries I lived, the racial, ethnic stratification and class stratification were so enmeshed in each other. And the second one was to be a foreigner. Because when I left, in Israel, it was, are you a Jew or not Jew? Are you a newcomer, oldcomer? In the United States also, it was kind of migration society, so you are identified by your ethnicity, race, religion, but not foreigner, not foreigner. But when I came to Britain, suddenly I understood what it is to be a foreigner. But then I forgot. Living in London, I really forgot, because it has become, I know that what Gagi is saying is absolutely true about, of course, and I mentioned it, that it's not kind of nostalgic. Of course, it was always a racialized society, and multiculturalism itself was policy which homogenized and reified kind of abnormal minorities and all this kind of thing. And yet, the boundaries of belonging as a political project today, this is why I said it has become associated with citizenship duty, which is not before. Because in Britain, because so much of the racism was directed against those who were subjects of the British Empire, citizenship and racism were not collapsed to each other, while now there is a much more closer relationship between the two. And this is, I think, a real significance change. What I was interested in the two first speakers is that the first one, if I understood it correctly, you brought that Brexit is some kind of a conspiracy of the government pushing its own kind of premeditated policy, and the second speaker saying it didn't have any plan, it just threw all kinds of things in the air and to see what will work. I really think that they did not believe that there's going to be Brexit. It was a device by David Cameron to shut up opposition within the Conservative Party. Things in history happen which are not premeditated, but they have an irreversible impact. And I think that this is what actually happened. The fact, I would agree more with the second kind of thing, that there is a confusion, there is a trial and error, but in which direction, I think it's, I like the politics of hope, and I agree with all the things that Georgia said about that, but I do not see all these movements of solidarity as having any kind of program of change power. I mean, what is happening in the Labour Party is interesting in that, but even there I'm kind of skeptical. Anyway.
I mean, what came to mind after your comments is that maybe there is scope to do something around the intersectionality of
Sure.
generations, class, locations, because maybe there is something else going on that we're not capturing if we use, this big third, which is the working classes, the young people, the old, the now, the south. Maybe that's what I got out of it. Maybe we need to do